I'm going to reel us back here to the 19th century, and people may have seen this illustration before by Henri Latrobe. Henri Latrobe was a European Frenchman who basically did some illustrations at Congo Square in New Orleans. And Congo Square is normally where we place, not so ironically, the origins of jazz. And here's where I lay some of my Pan-Africanist and African-centered bona fides on the table and say that the way I view jazz is that it's an African aesthetic from the diaspora that is most commonly found in music, but not always found in music. And its hallmarks are an African sensibility towards improvisation and collective egalitarian creativity. So, in other words, the jazz in other names can be found elsewhere in the diaspora and in other Black musics around the world. One of Latrobe's drawings right here, kind of underlines this notion of the Congo influence on jazz itself. The word itself, jazz, according to Robert Farris Thompson in Flash of the Spirit, and of course his primary informant, Dr. Kwadwo Deterville, the Congolese scholar, basically placed the origin of the word jazz itself in Congo, in the language Kikongo. It's a creolized version of the word zinza. It's spelled D-Z-I-N-A. And if someone wants to, look that up, you can find it in Robert Farris Thompson's classic book, Flash of the Spirit. What Latrobe is showing here is how the people from the enslaved Africans who came to Congo Square would lay the drum down flat on the ground and sit on it to play on it, exactly the way it was played in Central Africa, in Congo and Central Africa. So the essence of the aesthetic, the group improvisation, is born here in Congo Square with these African rhythms, clave in particular. Now, this is another, very important illustration. Why is that? Because very early at jazz music, the banjo was a very prominent instrument in the music. As time went on, the banjo fell out of favor. There weren't very many great banjo innovators that came out of the jazz aesthetic. However, early in the 20th century, one would oftentimes find, banjo players in traditional New Orleans music, which is, oftentimes misnomered as quote unquote Dixieland. But this version of this banjo right here, which is sometimes spelled B-A-N-J-A-R or B-A-N-G-J-E-R, it shows the African origins of the instrument banjo. And, again, here with the word origins that underlines its Africanity, the word banjo is a Bantu language word as well. So at the top, you can see this African sculpture at the top of this 19th century, homemade banjo found in New Orleans. Okay, so first time we got sound going on here. Let this play just a little bit. Okay. Now, the reason I have this on here is, of course, this is an African Brazilian instrument called the berimbau. And the berimbau is played in an African Brazilian game / fight called the Jogo de Capoeira. I used to teach capoeira. And one of the things that I noticed about capoeira is this notion of improvisation, African improvisation, collective improvisation. And I found that it had great affinities with the jazz aesthetic for that reason. The other thing where this particular image and sound is relevant to my presentation here is because this rhythm that the master in the picture, Master Jean Granger, who is still alive in his 80s and teaching in New York, this rhythm that you're hearing playing is called cavalaria, and it emphasizes some of the fraught nature of Black people gathering together and doing these things like jazz or capoeira, because capoeira was outlawed at one point, right? It was against the law to be found in one of these instruments in certain provinces in Brazil in the 19th and early 20th century. Now, the word cavalaria means cavalry, and that basically means that the police are coming, and what they would do is play that particular rhythm to warn the players of capoeira that the police basically were coming to break up the roda, or the circle in which they were playing this game and creating this music. Similarly, jazz music in the red light districts in New Orleans were oftentimes raided and policed, heavily policed by the New Orleans, white police forces. There's even a tale that Jelly Roll Morton tells about the police breaking into a session that Buddy Bolden was playing in, and basically breaking up the session by beating up a bunch of people. So this is one of the reasons why I have I'm very particular about jazz being an African aesthetic in the Americas rather than an American art form. I believe that it was born out of a great deal of segregation, and for that reason, the insular nature of its creativity made it an African diasporic aesthetic rather than something that's a product of American democracy. It's rather a product of African egalitarianism. So the gentleman that I just mentioned a moment ago is in this picture. I hope my cursor doesn't. No, it doesn't. Okay. So the gentleman that you see standing to the right-hand side of the bass player on the left-hand side of the screen, holding the coronet in his hand, that is the legendary Buddy Bolden. This is the only known existing photograph of him. Helps with his legend a bit, right? And so that's the gentleman that I just mentioned a moment ago. He's oftentimes credited as being, either the first or amongst the first jazz musicians, amongst the people, the handful of people or half a dozen people or so that really created the art form in the 19th century. And I'm showing this photograph for a couple of reasons. One, you'll see right there in the center, the prominence of the banjo. And there's even a banjo there on the ground. They probably had sometimes two playing in that band. This is just basically to emphasize the fact that the banjo was oftentimes prominent. But in this lecture that I'm giving right now, I'm also going to underline a lot of the unwritten or partially written histories of very early jazz in the San Francisco and Oakland Bay Area. We oftentimes hear about New Orleans, but we don't hear that much about the Bay Area. And the Bay Area is very important to the art form. As a matter of fact, the first time the word jazz appeared in print was in a San Francisco newspaper in the early 20th century. And the gentleman that you see over there, just barely peeking his head out on the right-hand side on the piano, that gentleman's name is Sid Laprotti, last name spelled Leprotti. Sid Laprotti was from Oakland, and he is written in a book called Jazz on the Barbary Coast about how he first heard ragtime jazz being played in West Oakland in the late 19th century when he was a kid. And so that's a very early, firsthand sighting of jazz in the Bay Area, which, says that there was some very early jazz musicians in the Bay Area, Laprotti being one of them. Let me not surprise you even more so in that, let's go back one more. Let's go back to Laprotti one more time. Let me not surprise you even more so in that Sid Laprotti's So Different Jazz Band was the first band to ever use the word jazz in its title. So the first time someone called their band, the official title, quote unquote, jazz band, was from a brother from Oakland in the early 19th century. And here's another little tidbit too. There was a jazz club in San Francisco in early 20th century called Purcell's. And it was created by and owned by two Pullman porters who also resided in Oakland. All right. This is an early jazz band from Oakland that I'm not sure, quite sure if there's any other information on them other than this photograph. But these Peacock Melody Strutters were from somewhere in the East Bay, the early 20th century. Again, you'll see the prominence of the banjo there. And sitting in dead center right there is the semi-legendary Sid Laprati again from Oakland with his So Different Jazz Band. Okay. So in the early 20th century, a lot of these jazz musicians were basically living in a kind of a free, radical state for Black people at that particular time. Because they're musicians, they could travel, even though the society was highly segregated. And in a lot of their time away from being musicians, they were actually radical activists. This cover here depicts a sister named Ravella Hughes. Why is Ravella Hughes important? Because she was a Garveyite. Marcus Garvey, who had this Pan-African movement, Pan-African Black nationalist movement that stretched from the Caribbean all the way to Britain and most of the United States, had also a band. This Garvey had a band, and in the 1920s, I believe it was, Garvey wrote a tune. It was a blues/jazz tune called "Keep Cool." And that's where the title of this book comes from. The scholar Ted Vincent wrote this book on the Black activists who built the jazz age. And so Ravella Hughes was a prominent Garveyite and also, one of the key performers in the Garveyite UNIA band. Another little footnote that might underline, Sid Laprati's presence and other jazz musicians' presence in West Oakland is that in West Oakland, the Liberty Hall, where the Garveyites met, is still standing and is a national landmark over there in West Oakland near 7th Street. And I'm told that the UNIA membership in that particular Liberty Hall was the largest membership west of the Mississippi River. So it wasn't a small thing. And it explains a lot why, figures, a couple of generations later, like Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale would emerge out of West Oakland to found the Black Panther Party. Okay, let's get this. Let's see, we get it playing. Boom, let me go back. Okay, this is Charles Mingus. I should be hearing some music right now, but I'm not. Okay, I will explain. This label, the Candid label, was a label that he co-founded with Max Roach and another writer named Nat Hentoff. And on this particular album, he does a song called The Fables of Faubus. And Senator Faubus was a staunch segregationist in the 1950s. And the song that Mingus did about him was basically critical of him, called him a fool, and lots of other things, which was unprecedented at that particular time. So this protest song that Mingus did was later released on the, I believe, Columbia label, but the Columbia label did it just as an instrumental and wouldn't release the lyrics that went along with it. So somebody might want to dial up at some point the tune Fables of Faubus to hear that. And here's our inspiration for this evening, the legendary Max Roach and his wife, Abby Lincoln. Max Roach, again, another co-founder along with Charles Mingus of that Candid label, and his wife, Abby Lincoln, the actress and activist, both of them great Pan-African activists at that particular time. She later changed her name to an African name, changed her name to Aminata Moseka, and spent some time on the continent as well with other, radical Pan-Africanists.